The room was supposed to be untouchable. White walls, soft lights, machines that cost more than most people's houses. This was where miracles were bought. Inside the glass-walled intensive care unit, a newborn lay completely still. Tubes ran from his tiny body like lifelines stretched too thin. 18 of the best doctors in the country stood around him in silence, men and women whose names filled medical journals, whose hands had saved presidents and princes. And yet no one spoke. The billionaire father stood at the edge of the room, eyes locked on his son. His tailored suit was wrinkled now. His phone, the same phone that could collapse markets with a single call, hung useless in his hand. For the first time in his life, money wasn't answering. One doctor finally broke the silence, not with hope, with surrender. "There's nothing more we can do." Another looked away. Another adjusted his coat, as if distance could protect him from failure. The machines continued their steady, unforgiving rhythm, counting down something no one wanted to say out loud. Outside that room, down a quiet hallway no cameras ever showed, a poor black boy sat on the cold floor beside a mop bucket. His backpack was torn. His sneakers were worn thin. Homework spread across his knees as his father worked the night shift cleaning floors no one noticed. The boy wasn't watching the doctors. He was listening. He heard the words they didn't realize mattered. He noticed the pauses, the fear hidden behind confidence. And then he saw the baby through the glass just for a second. Something in his chest tightened. A memory surfaced, a voice from years ago, his grandmother's voice, calm, certain, warning him that sometimes the most dangerous thing in a room isn't sickness. It's pride. The boy stood up. He walked toward the ICU doors, heart pounding. Before he could reach them, a security guard stepped in front of him. "Hey, you can't be here." A doctor glanced over and frowned. "Whose kid is that? Get him out of here." The billionaire never even turned around. The boy opened his mouth anyway. Because what they didn't know, what no amount of money, training, or power had prepared them for, was that the answer they were desperately searching for was standing right in front of them. Malik Johnson had learned early how to be invisible. In a city that never stopped moving, invisibility was survival. He kept his voice low, his eyes observant, his presence small. At 12 years old, Malik already understood which spaces were not built for boys like him, especially spaces with polished floors, glass walls, and people who spoke in quiet confidence. The hospital was one of those places. Every night after school, Malik waited for his father near the service entrance, where the air smelled of disinfectant and fatigue. His father, Isaiah Johnson, worked the night shift as a janitor. He pushed a cart through hallways filled with human stories he was never invited into: grief, hope, endings, beginnings. Isaiah worked silently, head down, because silence paid the bills. Malik followed him sometimes, sitting in corners with his homework, absorbing the world around him. He had grown up in these corridors. While other kids learned bedtime stories, Malik learned the sounds of hospitals, the pauses between footsteps, the way voices changed when news was bad, the difference between panic and control. He noticed things adults missed. He always had. That came from his grandmother. Before she passed, Malik's grandmother had lived with them in a cramped apartment across town. She had been a midwife decades ago, back when hospitals didn't welcome women like her into their classrooms. She learned through practice, intuition, and listening, really listening, to bodies that couldn't explain themselves. She used to tell Malik stories at night, stories about life beginning and ending in the same breath. "The body speaks," she would say, "but only if you respect it enough to listen." When she died, it wasn't in a room like this one. No glass walls, no elite specialists, just a public hospital, long waits, and quiet indifference. Malik never forgot that. Tonight, the hospital felt different. Security was tighter, voices were sharper, people moved faster, like something important, something powerful was at stake. Malik noticed the signs before anyone explained them. A billionaire's baby had been brought in. Richard Hale arrived the way powerful men always did, surrounded by urgency. Doctors straightened when he entered. Administrators hovered. Calls were made. Doors closed. Entire sections of the hospital were sealed off for privacy. Hale was known everywhere. A self-made tech billionaire, a man who built his empire on speed, precision, and control. He trusted data, systems, numbers. He didn't believe in luck, only leverage. This baby was supposed to be his legacy. The birth had been smooth, private suite, best care money could buy, but hours later something went wrong. No alarms at first, just a subtle change no one could explain, and then another, and another. Now his son lay in critical condition, and the most elite medical minds in the country had been flown in at his expense. 18 doctors, each one brilliant, each one certain until they were. Inside the ICU wing, tension hung heavy. The doctors spoke in controlled tones, but cracks were forming. Diagnoses didn't align. Test results contradicted expectations. Every solution led to another dead end. At the edge of those conversations stood Dr. Evelyn Carter. She wasn't part of the inner circle, even though she should have been. A seasoned pediatric nurse practitioner, Dr. Carter had spent her career working in underfunded hospitals, catching what others overlooked. She had learned to rely on pattern recognition and instinct when technology failed. She noticed things tonight that bothered her. The baby's symptoms didn't fully match the dominant diagnosis. There were gaps, inconsistencies, small signs that didn't make sense unless you were willing to question the assumptions guiding the room. When she tried to speak, her words were acknowledged, then dismissed. Not likely. Too rare. We've already ruled that out. No one raised their voice. No one needed to. The hierarchy was clear. Dr. Carter stepped back, jaw tight, watching ego replace curiosity. Outside, Malik watched too. From his spot near the wall, he saw the doctors move in and out. He noticed who never made eye contact with him, who didn't see him at all. He noticed how his father's presence shrank in these halls, a man reduced to utility. Malik felt something stirring in his chest, something uncomfortable. This wasn't just about a sick baby. It was about who mattered enough to be heard. The billionaire was fighting time. The doctors were fighting failure. Dr. Carter was fighting silence. And Malik, without fully understanding why, felt like he was fighting memory. Because something about this night felt familiar. Like a story he had already heard and didn't like how it ended. The air inside the intensive care unit shifted without warning. It wasn't dramatic, no alarm screamed, no one ran. It was worse than that. One of the monitors hesitated just for a breath before correcting itself. A pause so small only someone watching too closely would notice. The baby's chest rose, then didn't. Then rose again, shallow and uneven. Dr. Evelyn Carter noticed immediately. Her eyes moved from the baby's color to the oxygen line, then to the heart rhythm. Something was off, not crashing, not stabilizing either, hovering in a dangerous in-between. She stepped forward instinctively. "Wait," she said, quietly but firm. The lead neonatologist didn't look up. Vitals are within expected deviation. That deviation keeps repeating, Dr. Carter replied, in the same pattern. Still, no one turned toward her. The doctors were locked in debate now, circling the same conclusions they'd reached hours earlier. Rare complications were named and dismissed. Experimental procedures were discussed like chess moves, not lives. At the edge of the room, Richard Hale stood motionless. He had stopped pacing. That was how Dr. Carter knew fear had finally reached him. Hale had always believed motion meant control. Negotiations, takeovers, damage control, but there was nothing left to move now. No one to intimidate, no market to bend. His son lay inches away, and might as well have been on another planet. "Do something," Hale said finally, not shouting, worse begging, stripped of authority. "I don't care what it costs." The words landed wrong. A few doctors exchanged looks. One cleared his throat. Another straightened his coat. They were uncomfortable now, not because of the baby, but because desperation made power unpredictable. "We are doing everything medically indicated," the head doctor replied. "Throwing more at him could worsen the outcome." Hale stared at the incubator. "So you're telling me this is it?" No one answered. Outside the ICU doors, Malik Johnson stood frozen. He had seen Dr. Carter rush past him moments earlier, worry etched deep into her face. He had heard fragments of conversation, enough to feel the weight shift in the building. This was the moment hospitals tried to hide, the moment when hope stopped being managed and started slipping. Malik pressed closer to the glass. The baby looked different than before, not just weaker, wrong somehow. The rhythm felt off even without machines. Malik couldn't explain how he knew, he just did. And then he heard it. Two doctors passing behind him spoke in low voices, assuming the hallway was empty. His response doesn't match hypoxic injury. No, but everything else points there. Unless we're missing. We're not missing anything. Malik's breath caught. That sentence echoed too closely to a memory. Years ago in a cramped public hospital room, he had sat beside his grandmother's bed while doctors spoke over her, not to her. He remembered the same tone, the same certainty, the same refusal to listen. She had squeezed his hand weakly and whispered something he never forgot. "They're treating the chart," she said, "not the body." Malik's eyes snapped back to the baby. The machines were loud, confident, but the baby wasn't responding the way Malik had seen other infants respond. The chest movements, the tiny clenched fists, the tension in the neck. Malik swallowed hard. His grandmother had once told him about a newborn who nearly died because doctors focused on the obvious instead of the subtle. A case from long before Malik was born. A mistake corrected only because someone listened to the baby instead of the numbers. The word she used surfaced in his mind. Clear, sharp, dangerous. Malik took a step forward. A security guard immediately blocked his path. "Hey, you can't stand here." Malik didn't argue, he rarely did, but his eyes stayed on the baby. "I need to talk to someone," he said quietly. The guard frowned. "Who's your parent?" "My dad works here," Malik replied, nodding down the hall toward the janitorial carts. The guard followed his gaze, then looked back with mild annoyance. "This area's restricted." Inside the ICU, Dr. Carter felt it again, that nagging pull of unease. She watched the baby's chest carefully, then glanced at the monitor. The numbers said one thing. Her instinct said another. She remembered the hallway she'd just passed through, the boy sitting there, the way he watched, not with curiosity but concern. She shook the thought away. Focus. Another minute passed, then another. The baby's heart rate dipped, not enough to trigger alarms, just enough to raise quiet panic. "We're losing ground," one doctor murmured. Hale's head snapped up. "What does that mean?" "It means the window is closing," the doctor said. "We need to prepare for—" "For what?" Hale demanded. No answer. Dr. Carter couldn't stay silent anymore. "There's a possibility we're treating the wrong problem," she said, louder now. Finally, eyes turned toward her. The lead doctor sighed. "With respect, Evelyn, we've covered every plausible cause." "Plausible according to current protocols," she replied. "But the baby's responses don't align fully, the breathing pattern." "Is being managed," he interrupted. Dr. Carter clenched her hands. "Managed doesn't mean understood." The room went quiet. Hale looked between them. "Are you saying they're wrong?" Dr. Carter hesitated, not because she doubted herself, but because she knew the cost of saying yes. Before she could answer, a small voice cut through the tension. "Excuse me." Everyone turned. Malik stood just inside the doorway, the security guard distracted by a ringing phone behind him. Malik's heart pounded so loud he was sure they could hear it. "I think you're missing something," he said. The silence that followed was thick and immediate. A doctor blinked. "Who let this kid in here?" Security rushed forward. "I'm sorry, he slipped." "Get him out," the lead doctor snapped. Hale didn't even look at Malik. "This isn't the time." Malik felt heat rise to his face, but he didn't back away. "The baby's breathing isn't reacting the way it should," he said, voice trembling but steady. "My grandma." "That's enough," the doctor cut in sharply. "This is an ICU, not a classroom." Security grabbed Malik's arm. Dr. Carter's eyes locked onto the boy. Something about the way he spoke, not guessing, not dramatic, hit her. "Wait," she said. The room froze again. Dr. Carter stepped closer to Malik. "What did you notice?" Malik looked up at her, surprised, not by her authority, but by her willingness to listen. Before he could answer, the baby's monitor dipped again. This time, the alarm sounded. And suddenly, no one was certain who belonged in the room anymore. The alarm cut through the room like a blade. Sharp, unforgiving, impossible to ignore. Doctors moved instantly, their training taking over as hands reached for controls and eyes locked onto screens. The baby's tiny body tensed, then slackened, the rhythm of his breathing turning erratic in a way that made even the most seasoned among them uneasy. "Heart rate dropping," one doctor said. "Adjust ventilation," another ordered. Richard Hale stepped back instinctively, his confidence shattering in real time. For the first time since he entered the hospital, he looked small, not because of where he stood, but because of what he couldn't command. Security tightened their grip on Malik's arm. The boy flinched but didn't cry out. His eyes never left the baby. "Take him out," the lead doctor barked again. "Now." Dr. Evelyn Carter stepped between them. "Stop," she said. The room paused, not because of her authority, but because of the tone in her voice. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't emotional. It was grounded, certain. "This child noticed something," she continued. "And whether we like it or not, the baby is deteriorating under our current approach." The lead doctor stared at her. "You're seriously suggesting we pause critical intervention to listen to a janitor's kid?" Dr. Carter didn't blink. "I'm suggesting we stop assuming we know everything." That landed harder than she expected. The room split instantly, not physically, but morally. Some doctors bristled, others looked away. A few glanced back at the monitors, silently questioning their own certainty. Richard Hale's gaze finally dropped to Malik. Really looked at him. The boy was shaking now, fear catching up to courage. His clothes were too thin for the cold air. His voice had already cost him safety, and he knew it. Still, he stood there. "What do you think you know?" Hale asked sharply. Malik swallowed. "I don't know everything," he said, "but I've seen this before." A doctor scoffed. "You've seen a billionaire's newborn in critical condition before." Malik shook his head. "I've seen doctors listen to machines and ignore people." The words hit the room like a quiet accusation. "My grandma was a midwife," Malik continued, glancing at Dr. Carter, then back at the baby. "She said sometimes babies don't respond to what you expect because you're treating the symptom you can measure, not the cause you can't." The lead doctor stepped forward. "Enough, this is inappropriate and dangerous." "Dangerous is doing the same thing while the baby gets worse," Dr. Carter replied. The alarm softened slightly as adjustments were made, but the instability remained. A fragile calm, the kind that felt borrowed. Hale rubbed his face with both hands. "This is insane," he muttered. 18 doctors and I'm supposed to." He stopped himself. Because the sentence ended somewhere, he didn't want to go. Dr. Carter turned to him. "Sir, with respect, nothing about this situation is normal. We are past the point of comfort." Silence filled the space again. Malik hesitated, then spoke quickly, afraid he'd lose the chance. "The baby's breathing pattern isn't reacting like oxygen deprivation," he said. "It's tightening, like his body's fighting something internal." Several doctors stiffened. "That's not consistent with," one began. "With what you expect," Malik interrupted, then immediately apologized. "I'm sorry, I just mean my grandma said when babies fight air, it's sometimes because the problem isn't the lungs." Dr. Carter's pulse quickened. She stepped closer to the incubator, eyes narrowing as she re-examined the baby through Malik's words. The stiffness in the chest, the subtle muscle tension, the way the oxygen levels dipped without the typical lag. She felt it then, the shift. The pieces didn't click all at once. They resisted, but they moved. "Say that again," she told Malik. "What did your grandmother say?" Malik closed his eyes, forcing himself to remember clearly. "She said some conditions look like breathing failure, but they're actually metabolic. The body locks up because it can't process something." The room went deathly quiet. A younger doctor frowned at the chart. "That's extremely rare." Dr. Carter walked over and pulled up a secondary data stream. Her fingers moved fast now. "Rare doesn't mean impossible," she said, "especially if you're not looking for it." The lead doctor shook his head. "We ran standard panels." "Standard," she repeated, "not expanded." Hale's voice cracked. "Are you saying there's something else wrong with my son?" Dr. Carter met his eyes. "I'm saying there might be, and we haven't ruled it out." "And what happens if you're wrong?" one doctor demanded. Dr. Carter didn't hesitate. "Then we've already lost him anyway." That truth settled heavily over the room. Security loosened their grip on Malik's arm, uncertain now. No one was quite sure who had authority anymore. Dr. Carter turned to the lead doctor. "Give me 10 minutes. Let me run the expanded panel. If I'm wrong, I'll step aside." The lead doctor laughed bitterly. "Based on what? A child's memory." "Based on my judgment," she said firmly, "and the fact that our current path is failing." Hale looked between them, desperation hollowing his face. He had built his life on calculated risks. This was the first one that terrified him. "How long?" he asked. Dr. Carter answered without hesitation. 10 minutes, maybe less." The lead doctor started to object, then stopped. Because the baby's heart rate dipped again. "Just enough." Hale closed his eyes. "Do it," he said quietly. The room erupted into motion, but the energy had changed. This wasn't confidence anymore, it was urgency laced with doubt. Dr. Carter moved fast, ordering tests that hadn't been considered hours earlier. A few doctors followed her lead reluctantly. Others watched in stunned silence. Malik stepped back toward the wall, suddenly aware of how exposed he was. Had he gone too far? Had he said too much? Dr. Carter caught his eye as she passed, just for a second. She nodded. Not in praise. In gratitude. Minutes crawled. Machines hummed, screens refreshed, doctors whispered. Richard Hale stood beside the incubator, one hand hovering over the glass but never touching it. He had never felt so powerless or so aware of how quickly power meant nothing. Then Dr. Carter froze. She stared at the screen in front of her, heart pounding. The numbers didn't lie. Her breath caught. She turned slowly toward the room. "Everyone needs to look at this," she said. The lead doctor stepped forward, irritation already forming, then fading. Because the data didn't support their certainty. It supported the boy. Malik's knees felt weak. The truth he had carried so quietly, the one he wasn't sure anyone would believe, now stood in bright, undeniable numbers. The baby wasn't dying because they lacked skill. He was dying because they hadn't listened. And now, the entire room had to decide whether pride mattered more than a life. The room did not erupt into relief when the results appeared. If anything, the air grew heavier. Screens glowed softly, numbers rearranging themselves into a pattern that no one wanted to acknowledge too quickly. The diagnosis did not announce itself loudly. It crept in, undeniable and quiet, forcing every person in the room to confront a truth far more uncomfortable than uncertainty. They had been wrong. Dr. Evelyn Carter stood closest to the monitor, shoulders squared, eyes steady. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't triumphant. This was not victory, this was consequence. "These markers explain the respiratory resistance," she said evenly. "It's not failure, it's overload. His body is locking itself to survive." The lead doctor leaned forward, jaw tightening as he scanned the data. He didn't respond immediately. Around him, a few others did the same, rereading values they had dismissed hours earlier. "That's extremely rare," one finally said. Dr. Carter nodded. "Rare doesn't mean impossible, it means unfamiliar." Richard Hale stepped closer, his reflection faintly visible in the glass of the incubator. "Are you saying this could have been caught earlier?" No one answered. The silence wasn't accidental, it was protective. Dr. Carter spoke anyway. "Yes." That single word cracked something open. Hale's chest rose sharply. Then why wasn't it? A doctor cleared his throat. "We followed protocol." Dr. Carter turned toward him. Protocol didn't include curiosity. The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They hung in the air, demanding ownership. Malik remained near the wall, hands folded tight, shoulders hunched as if bracing for impact. Every adult in the room felt enormous now. The gravity of what he had started pressed down on him, heavy and unfamiliar. He hadn't planned this. He had only spoken because silence felt worse. The baby shifted slightly in the incubator, a small movement that sent eyes darting back toward him. The monitors flickered but held steady, as if waiting to see what would happen next. "Can this be treated?" Hale asked, voice low. Dr. Carter didn't sugarcoat it. "Yes, but not the way we've been doing things." The lead doctor straightened. You're proposing a metabolic intervention without full confirmation. I'm proposing we stop suffocating him with the wrong solution, she replied. Murmurs rippled through the room. Concern, resistance, fear disguised as professionalism. This could backfire, someone said. Dr. Carter met their eyes, so could doing nothing. Hale rubbed his temples, the weight of the decision settling in. He had negotiated billion-dollar deals with less hesitation, but none of those risks had carried a heartbeat. What are the odds? He asked. Dr. Carter paused. Better than what we're facing now. That was all she could promise. Malik lowered himself into a chair, legs trembling. The adrenaline that had carried him forward finally ebbed, leaving doubt behind. He wondered if his grandmother's voice had been memory or imagination. He wondered if courage always felt this lonely afterward. Dr. Carter noticed his posture shift. She crossed the room quietly and stopped in front of him. You okay? Malik nodded, though his hands betrayed him. I didn't mean to cause trouble. She softened. You didn't cause trouble, you interrupted it. Across the room, preparations began. Medication was adjusted. Dosages recalculated. A new rhythm took shape, unfamiliar and tense. Some doctors complied immediately. Others moved slower, eyes flicking toward the lead doctor, waiting for permission that never quite came. This goes against everything we've practiced, one muttered. Dr. Carter replied without turning. Then maybe everything we've practiced needs to be questioned. Hale watched her closely now, seeing not defiance but responsibility. She wasn't challenging authority for ego. She was standing where others had stepped back. Why haven't I heard your name before? Hale asked quietly. Dr. Carter didn't miss a beat. Because I work where outcomes matter more than headlines. The words lingered. The lead doctor said nothing, but his silence spoke volumes. His authority had been built on certainty, and certainty was slipping. As the intervention began, the room narrowed its focus. Every adjustment felt deliberate. Every second felt counted. Malik watched the baby's chest carefully. The tension he'd noticed before was still there, but something had shifted, subtle, fragile. Hope was not rushing in, it was inching. Vitals holding, someone said. Holding isn't improving, another replied. Dr. Carter leaned closer to the incubator, studying the baby's face. She thought of all the times she'd been ignored, spoken over, dismissed. Tonight wasn't about her, but it was shaped by every moment that had led here. Give it time, she said. His body needs to adjust. Minutes crawled. Hale stood frozen, afraid that moving would somehow tip the balance. He had never felt this exposed, this dependent on people who didn't answer to him. Power had always been distance. Now distance felt like abandonment. Malik clasped his hands together, eyes closed. He remembered his grandmother's calm presence, the way she never panicked when others did. He tried to borrow that steadiness now. A nurse spoke softly. Oxygen saturation is stabilizing. The room stilled. Not celebration, not relief. Attention. Dr. Carter nodded once. That's a start. The lead doctor exhaled slowly, the tension visible in his shoulders. Let's continue monitoring. No objections followed. Something fundamental had shifted, not just medically but socially. The hierarchy no longer felt absolute. Voices once ignored carried weight. Malik opened his eyes. For the first time since he entered the room, he felt seen, not as a problem, not as a disruption, but as a person whose presence mattered. The baby stirred again, a tiny hand curling inward. And in that small motion, the system felt its first real challenge, not from rebellion but from truth. The next hour stretched in a way that made time feel unreal, as if the hospital itself was holding its breath. The earlier chaos had settled into something quieter but far more dangerous: expectation. Every person in the room understood that what happened next would define more than the baby's fate. It would expose who they were when certainty collapsed. Dr. Evelyn Carter remained stationed near the incubator, her posture calm but alert. She watched the baby not as a case, not as a collection of numbers, but as a life responding minute by minute to decisions made by imperfect people. The monitors were no longer the authority. They were witnesses. Across the room, the lead doctor stood apart from the others, arms folded, eyes narrowed. His confidence had not disappeared, but it had hardened into something defensive. He had spent decades becoming untouchable, and now a truth introduced by a child threatened to undo that armor. He was not angry at Malik. He was angry at what Malik represented. A flaw in the system. Richard Hale paced slowly, each step measured, as if restraint itself were an effort. He stopped near the glass, staring down at his son. The baby's face looked softer now, less strained, though no one dared to call it improvement yet. Hale's mind raced through 1,000 thoughts, none of which money could solve. He turned to Dr. Carter. "If this works," he said quietly, "what does that mean?" She didn't pretend not to understand. "It means we were listening too late," she replied, "but not too late." That distinction mattered more than hope. Malik sat silently, shoulders tense, absorbing the weight of everything unfolding. No one had asked him to leave. That alone felt surreal. He had spent his life learning when to disappear, and now disappearing felt wrong. Still, he didn't speak. He had already said the hardest thing. A nurse adjusted a line and glanced at Dr. Carter. "Levels are responding." Dr. Carter leaned closer, eyes sharp. "Slowly," she said, "that's what we want." The lead doctor scoffed under his breath. "Or it's coincidence." Dr. Carter turned toward him. "Then let's see if coincidence keeps happening." The room went quiet again. Minutes passed, then more. The baby's breathing pattern changed subtly, becoming less rigid, less forced. The chest rose and fell with a rhythm that felt more natural, less like a struggle. It wasn't a miracle. It was progress earned inch by inch. Hale noticed it before anyone spoke. "Is that normal?" he asked. Dr. Carter nodded cautiously. "It's appropriate." That word carried weight. One of the doctors finally spoke up, voice subdued. "If this is what you think it is, then the earlier treatment may have made it worse." The statement hung in the air, heavy with implication. The lead doctor's jaw tightened. "We did what was standard." "Yes," Dr. Carter replied, "and sometimes standard isn't enough." No one argued that point. Malik watched the exchange, recognizing something familiar. Adults protecting pride the way children protected fear. He thought of his grandmother again, of how she never rushed to defend herself when challenged. She let truth speak. It always did, eventually. A nurse approached Hale quietly. "Sir, you should know, this approach isn't widely used anymore." Hale nodded. "Neither is listening to poor black boys," he said, not looking away from his son. The nurse didn't respond, but her expression changed. Dr. Carter caught Malik's eye across the room. There was no smile, no reassurance, just shared awareness. This wasn't over, it was unfolding. The baby stirred again, a soft movement of the fingers this time. A sound escaped his throat, faint but distinct. Not a cry, more like a question. Every head turned. "Did you hear that?" someone whispered. Dr. Carter didn't move. "Yes," she said, "that's his nervous system responding." The lead doctor stepped closer now, unable to stay removed. He studied the baby with fresh eyes, seeing not confirmation of failure, but evidence of something new, something humbling. "This changes things," he admitted quietly. It was the closest he would come to apology. Hale exhaled slowly, a sound that carried weeks of tension. He placed a hand on the glass, careful not to touch it, as if proximity alone might disturb the fragile balance. "I've built companies on disruption," he said, voice low. "I never thought I'd see it save my son." Dr. Carter replied without looking at him. "Disruption only matters when it serves people." The intervention continued, measured and deliberate. No one rushed, no one celebrated. They had learned restraint the hard way. Malik shifted in his seat, exhaustion creeping in. The weight of the moment pressed down on him now that adrenaline no longer shielded him. He wondered if his father knew where he was, if he was in trouble, if he would be punished for speaking out of turn. Dr. Carter seemed to sense his thoughts. She crossed the room again and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Your father's going to be proud," she said softly. Malik didn't answer. Pride felt distant. Survival felt closer. Outside the ICU, the hospital continued its routine. Patients waited. Phones rang. Life went on, unaware that inside this room something fundamental was shifting. Another doctor checked the readings and nodded slowly. "Stability is improving." The lead doctor looked at Dr. Carter. "We'll need to document everything." "Of course," she replied. "Transparency matters." That word again. Hale turned toward Malik, studying him openly now. "What's your name?" he asked. Malik hesitated. Malik. Hale nodded. Malik, he repeated, as if committing it to memory. There was no grand gesture, no dramatic gratitude, just recognition. The baby's breathing evened out further, the tightness easing. It wasn't recovery yet, but it was direction. Dr. Carter straightened slightly. We're not out of danger, she said, but we're moving the right way. The lead doctor nodded. We'll continue under this protocol. It wasn't surrender, it was acceptance. Malik leaned back in his chair, finally allowing himself to breathe. He hadn't saved anyone, not yet, but he had helped stop the harm, and that felt like something. As the room settled into watchful quiet, one truth became undeniable. The most powerful moment that night hadn't come from expertise alone, or wealth, or authority. It had come from the willingness to listen when listening felt uncomfortable. And that willingness had changed the direction of everything. The room felt suspended in time, as if the entire hospital and perhaps even the world outside had paused to watch. Every breath, every movement, every silent thought weighed more than any luxury, any title, any power. The baby's chest rose slowly, still fragile but more controlled than before, as if the body itself were testing the waters of a new possibility. Dr. Carter didn't celebrate. She couldn't. Every second still carried risk, and every movement from the infant now held the potential to unravel everything. Richard Hale stood rigid, eyes locked on the incubator. He had spent decades constructing certainty in a world that rewarded decisiveness, but now he understood the illusion of control. A 12-year-old boy, a boy whose hands were calloused, whose shoes were worn, whose voice had rarely been heard, had shifted the tide of life. Hale swallowed hard, the gravity of the moment sinking in. For the first time, he realized that his money, his influence, and even his brilliance could not guarantee the survival of the one thing he treasured most: his son. Dr. Carter moved efficiently around the room, issuing commands in measured tones. She was calm, but her mind raced with every possibility. She had seen situations like this before, not with billionaires, not in glass-walled ICUs, but in overcrowded wards where no one cared who got saved and who didn't. The stakes had never been higher. She knew every decision now, every adjustment would ripple out and determine life or death. Malik sat on the edge of the room, hands clenched in his lap, heart pounding in rhythm with the monitors. He wasn't a doctor. He wasn't supposed to understand every reading or every subtle variation in vitals, but he felt them instinctively. His grandmother's lessons, her voice echoing in memory, guided him silently. "The body speaks," she had said. "You only have to listen." Now he did. He was listening, and in that listening he became more than a boy in the hallway. He became an agent of hope. One of the doctors checked the lines again. "Heart rate is stabilizing," she said, voice almost a whisper. "Blood oxygen is trending upward." The words were small, but in a room where silence had ruled for hours, they felt monumental. The lead doctor, who had resisted every step of the process until now, leaned forward, scrutinizing the monitors as if willing the numbers to confirm what Dr. Carter had already suspected. His hands shook slightly. It wasn't anger or frustration this time, it was awe tinged with disbelief. He had been trained to rely on certainty, to dismiss intuition, to follow protocol above all else. Yet the evidence was undeniable. The child was responding. Not fully recovered, but responding. And the change had come not from the combined experience of 18 experts, but from the courage of a boy who had spoken when silence was expected. Richard Hale's gaze flicked from the monitors to Malik. The boy looked small in the sterile room, but he had never seemed more commanding. Hale felt an unfamiliar surge of humility. For decades, he had been the architect of systems, the builder of empires, the orchestrator of outcomes. Now he stood powerless in front of the most important system in the world, life itself. And it was Malik, unseen, underestimated, and disregarded by society, who had offered the crucial insight. "Give him more time," Dr. Carter instructed softly. Her hands moved to adjust a setting, precise and deliberate. Every motion carried weight, every choice a test of judgment. She had spent years relying on training, on textbooks, on rules. Tonight she relied on instinct, guided by the boy's observation. The room felt electric with tension, every doctor and nurse poised on the knife's edge between success and failure. The baby stirred again, a delicate movement of the hand curling slightly. It was not a cry, but it was enough to shift the attention of everyone present. The monitors responded gradually, reflecting a system slowly regaining balance. A nurse leaned forward to check the lines, her face tight with concentration. "Respiration is improving," she said quietly, as if speaking too loudly might undo the fragile progress. Malik's chest tightened with relief, though he didn't allow himself to smile. He had learned that hope was dangerous until it was verified. Every beat of the monitor was a test of patience, every rise and fall a reminder that life could be undone in an instant. He thought of his grandmother again, of her hands steady and confident even when the world around her seemed to collapse. He imagined her whispering, "Stay present, listen, and do not panic." The lead doctor exhaled slowly. I cannot deny it," he admitted, voice low but steady. "The intervention is working." The admission, simple as it was, shifted the energy in the room. Doctors who had resisted before now moved with purpose, following Dr. Carter's instructions, double-checking readings, adjusting dosages with meticulous care. The room hummed with controlled activity, the quiet intensity of professionals facing the precipice and choosing to act responsibly. Hale's hands clenched the edge of the incubator. "How much longer?" he asked. The desperation in his voice was raw, untempered by status or composure. He had spent a lifetime avoiding vulnerability. Now vulnerability was all he had, and it felt suffocating. Dr. Carter turned toward him. "Minutes," she said. "We are still in the window, but every second counts." Her words were firm, yet not cruel. They carried authority because they were grounded in knowledge and instinct. Malik felt a lump rise in his throat. He wanted to leave, to shrink back to invisibility, but he couldn't. Not now. Not after seeing the fragility of life so exposed, so close, so dependent on choices he had helped illuminate. He clenched his fists, breathing shallow, focusing entirely on the baby. Another minute passed. The baby's chest lifted and fell with greater ease. Vitals continued to respond. It was no longer tentative. Progress had shifted into momentum. Doctors exchanged brief glances, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. The outcome was turning in favor of life. Hale exhaled sharply, as if finally releasing the breath he had been holding for hours. His eyes flicked back to Malik. You saw it?" he asked, disbelief mingling with gratitude. Malik nodded, voice barely above a whisper. "I just noticed something." Hale's expression softened, a rare vulnerability crossing his features. "You saved my son." Malik shook his head. "I didn't save him, we all listened." Dr. Carter approached, standing beside Malik and Hale, her eyes scanning the monitors carefully. "The baby is responding because we stopped assuming and started observing," she said. "Every action we took was grounded in careful attention. The difference tonight was perspective." The lead doctor, once resistant and now humbled, muttered, "Perspective. A 12-year-old boy gave perspective." His voice was tinged with awe. He glanced around at his peers, many of whom avoided eye contact, some silently ashamed, others contemplative. Minutes bled into what felt like hours. The baby's chest rose more naturally, fingers curling and uncurling. Subtle signs of distress gradually disappeared. The room, tense and electric moments before, now breathed with cautious optimism. Hale reached forward, hand trembling slightly, and brushed a finger against the glass. "Stay with us," he whispered. His words were not for the machines, not for the doctors, but for the small life beneath the plastic and lights. Malik watched him and for the first time felt a strange connection. Here was a man who had everything and yet realized his greatest vulnerability. Here was a boy who had nothing and had found the courage to act anyway. Both were bound by a single truth. Life demanded attention, courage, and honesty above all else. The baby's eyes fluttered and a soft whimper escaped. It wasn't a full cry, but it was enough to make every heartbeat in the room synchronize in relief. Doctors allowed themselves to lean forward, to adjust lines and notes with a slightly lighter tension. Nurses exhaled audibly, careful not to disturb the delicate balance. Dr. Carter moved to the lead doctor, her voice calm but firm. "Document everything. We will need this for future protocols. This case proves that listening and observing beyond the expected can be the difference between life and death." The lead doctor nodded slowly. He was humbled but not broken. There was still pride, still a career to protect, but now tempered with the recognition that knowledge alone is incomplete without attentiveness to nuance and courage to act on unexpected insight. Hale's eyes softened, and for the first time that night he allowed himself to imagine a future where his son would live. He turned to Malik again. "You were brave, more than anyone in this room realized." Malik's throat tightened. He wanted to shrink back, wanted to disappear into the shadows where he had spent most of his life. But the room no longer allowed that. His presence mattered, his voice mattered, his observation mattered. The baby stirred again, a faint kick of tiny legs, a shift in posture that indicated comfort and strength returning. The monitors displayed stable readings, the rhythm steadying. Hope, fragile and careful, had arrived. Dr. Carter watched the infant, then glanced at Malik. "You reminded us of something important tonight," she said, "that the people we overlook sometimes hold the key we desperately need." Malik looked down at his hands, still clenched. "I just remembered my grandmother," he said quietly. "She always said, 'The body speaks, you have to listen.'" Every adult in the room absorbed that statement. Some felt shame, others felt inspiration. Hale felt something he had never felt in boardrooms or executive suites: humility. Hours passed slowly, the room now focused on careful monitoring instead of frantic intervention. The baby's vitals remained stable. The chest rose evenly, the fingers flexed naturally, and the color returned to the soft pink of healthy life. Every detail mattered, every breath was a victory. Finally, the lead doctor approached Dr. Carter. His expression was a mixture of respect and reluctant admiration. "You were right," he admitted, "and so was the boy." Dr. Carter shook her head slightly. "We all played our part, but yes, courage and attention saved him." Hale approached Malik slowly, extending a hand. "I don't know if words can thank you enough," he said. His voice trembled slightly. "You didn't just observe, you acted when no one else would." Malik hesitated, then shook his head. "I didn't do it alone, I just noticed. You all made it real." The room settled into a quiet reverence. The baby slept, stable and safe for the first time in hours. Machines continued their hum, now no longer an ominous presence, but witnesses to a life preserved through courage, listening, and moral action. Outside the ICU, the hospital carried on. Nurses and staff walked past, unaware of the extraordinary drama that had unfolded within one glass-walled room. But inside, time had shifted. Knowledge had been tested. Authority had been challenged. And life had triumphed, fragile yet undeniable, because a child dared to speak and an adult dared to listen. Malik finally allowed himself to exhale, long and deep. His grandmother's lessons had guided him. His voice had been heard. His courage had mattered. And for the first time, he realized that the world could bend in ways no amount of power could predict if you paid attention and acted. Dr. Carter closed her eyes for a moment, letting the relief wash over her. Years of frustration, dismissal, and unseen effort had culminated in this moment. She had risked defiance, reputation, and procedure to follow truth. Tonight, truth had saved a life. Richard Hale knelt briefly to look at his son more closely. The hum of machines, once terrifying, now felt like a lullaby. His eyes swept across the room, resting finally on Malik. There was respect there. Awe, gratitude, and something deeper, recognition that life is never guaranteed, no matter wealth or status. The climax was complete, not in a dramatic explosion of motion, but in the quiet, relentless triumph of truth, courage, and moral attention. The baby was alive. The room had changed. And for everyone present, the night had carved a memory that would linger far beyond the sterile walls of the ICU. The final seconds stretched as monitors displayed the steady, rhythmic rise and fall of life. Every hand in the room moved with careful precision. Every heartbeat synchronized with an unspoken acknowledgement. Sometimes the unthinkable comes from the least expected source. Sometimes courage speaks quietly and changes everything. Malik looked down at his sneakers, worn thin from years of walking unnoticed paths. Tonight they had carried him into history, not history of wealth or power, but history of life itself. The boy who had been ignored, underestimated, and dismissed had made the difference between life and death. Dr. Carter glanced at him, silently conveying what words could not: respect, recognition, a bond forged in the fire of crisis, sealed by attention to truth. Richard Hale finally allowed himself to place a hand gently on Malik's shoulder. "You are extraordinary," he said softly, "more than I can ever properly acknowledge." Malik swallowed hard. He had been brave, he had been seen, and he had been heard. And in that recognition, he understood something fundamental. Courage, attention, and moral responsibility were more powerful than fear, arrogance, or even wealth. The baby's eyelids fluttered open briefly, a small, innocent gaze that seemed to acknowledge the room around him. No words could describe the weight of that moment. It was life affirming itself, fragile but determined, a testament to the intersection of observation, courage, and action. The climax had not come with fireworks or dramatics. It had come quietly, persistently, morally, emotionally, in the hands of those willing to act when the world expected compliance, and in the mind of a boy willing to notice what others overlooked. The monitors continued their hum. The baby's chest rose steadily. The room exhaled collectively, each person changed in ways they did not yet fully comprehend. Authority had been challenged, ego had been tempered, courage had triumphed, and for the first time that night, the possibility of the future, fragile, real, and undeniable, could be imagined with hope. No one spoke at first. Words seemed unnecessary. Every eye remained on the small life that had been preserved, a life whose survival had depended on attention, care, and the audacity to act when no one else would. Richard Hale finally broke the silence. "I will never forget this," he said. "None of you, none of us will." Malik felt a warmth in his chest, an affirmation that extended far beyond the room. He had been brave. He had been heard. He had been part of something that mattered more than power, money, or prestige. Tonight, he had witnessed the truth. Sometimes the unthinkable comes from the least expected, and it changes everything. The climax had been reached. It was no longer theoretical, no longer waiting on potential. It was real, living, breathing, and it would never be forgotten. The baby, fragile but strong, opened his eyes again, and the room exhaled together, a shared acknowledgement that courage, truth, and moral clarity had rewritten what had seemed inevitable. For everyone present, the night had become a lesson etched into memory. Not about wealth, not about title, not about protocol, but about listening, observing, and acting when it mattered most. And in the stillness after the storm, one truth remained clear. Life, fragile and precious, can always be preserved when someone notices, cares, and refuses to ignore the unthinkable. The first light of dawn crept through the tall hospital windows, soft and almost hesitant. Inside the ICU, the tension that had gripped every soul began to ebb, replaced by a fragile sense of relief. The baby slept peacefully in his incubator, the rise and fall of his chest steady, measured, and strong enough now that every person in the room dared to breathe normally. The machines hummed quietly, no longer an ominous presence but silent witnesses to the miracle of attention, courage, and care. Richard Hale sat near the incubator, his hands folded tightly in his lap. He had not moved in hours, frozen in a mixture of fear, awe, and disbelief. His son's life had hung by a thread, and he had felt powerless at every turn. But now, watching the child rest in fragile peace, Hale realized the depth of what had transpired. It wasn't skill, money, or authority alone that had saved him. It was observation, listening, moral courage, and the willingness of someone society had underestimated to speak up. He looked at Malik, who sat quietly in the corner, hands still folded, eyes wide but thoughtful. The boy had not cried. He had not demanded recognition. He had only acted. And in that quiet, humble courage, Hale found a deep, unfamiliar sense of gratitude. It was one thing to build an empire, to negotiate power and influence. It was another entirely to witness life saved by someone with nothing but insight and bravery. Dr. Evelyn Carter stood near Malik, watching the boy with quiet respect. Her own exhaustion was evident, yet she moved with the grace and authority of someone who had been tested and found capable. She understood fully that this night had rewritten assumptions, not just in medicine, but in human judgment. She had led a team of highly trained professionals, but it had been a child's perception, coupled with her willingness to listen, that had saved the baby. The lead doctor, who had resisted every step of the unconventional approach, now hovered near the incubator. His posture was stiff but contemplative, a mix of professional humility and personal discomfort. He had spent a lifetime adhering to protocol, relying on certainty, and dismissing input from those he considered inexperienced. Yet the evidence was undeniable. The child's life had been preserved because a voice he might once have ignored was spoken, listened to, and acted upon. "Dr. Carter," he said quietly, his voice low, I underestimated you, and him." He nodded toward Malik. "This is a reminder, a hard one but necessary." Dr. Carter did not respond immediately. She was watching the monitors, ensuring every vital remained stable. When she did speak, it was calm, firm, and measured. "We act not for pride, but for life. That is the only measure that matters." Malik shifted slightly, the weight of the night settling on his young shoulders. He had never been asked to be brave in this way. He had been trained to stay unseen, unheard, invisible in a world that often dismissed him. Yet now he felt seen, and that recognition carried its own strange, disorienting power. For the first time, he understood that courage and observation could matter more than fear and social expectation. Hale finally reached out, resting a hand lightly on Malik's shoulder. "You were extraordinary," he said softly. What you did tonight, no words can ever truly capture it. Malik shook his head, voice barely above a whisper. I didn't do it alone. Everyone here, we all did it together. Hale's eyes lingered on him. Still, it took someone brave enough to speak the truth when others refused to listen. That was you. Across the room, the nurses moved with quiet precision, adjusting lines and monitoring readings. Each of them carried the memory of the night in their own way. Some had seen death before, but few had witnessed life being wrested from the edge of impossibility through nothing but courage, attention, and human connection. They felt the gravity of what had happened, even as they continued their work. Dr. Carter finally took a step back, allowing herself a brief moment to exhale. She studied the room, the exhausted faces, the silent awe, the shifting dynamics of authority. She had led, but the lesson was clear. Leadership was not just in commands and expertise, but in the humility to listen, to trust, and to act when conventional wisdom fell short. Hale, still seated, watched his son. Every breath was a testament to life, fragile but indomitable. He thought of all the things money could buy, all the influence and power he had wielded, and realized that nothing had prepared him for this. Life had been entrusted to him, and yet it had been preserved not by his wealth, but by a child's insight and a doctor's courage to act against the grain. Malik finally looked up, meeting Dr. Carter's eyes. She gave him a subtle nod, conveying more than words could: respect, recognition, validation. In that small gesture, he felt a sense of belonging, of contribution, of being truly acknowledged for the first time in his life. The lead doctor approached, his demeanor different now. I've spent my career believing expertise alone was enough, he admitted. Tonight, I learned that humility, listening, and courage are equally vital. The boy's observation, paired with Dr. Carter's judgment, changed everything. Malik's lips parted slightly, unsure how to respond. He had expected criticism, reprimand, perhaps even dismissal. Instead, he was met with acknowledgement, a rare and transformative experience. Hale stood, finally breaking the spell of frozen attention. He moved toward the incubator, placing a hand lightly on the glass. You're going to be okay, he whispered to his son. We're going to take care of you. His voice carried a mixture of relief, awe, and a deep paternal love he had never truly comprehended until this moment. Dr. Carter watched silently, ensuring every adjustment was correct, every reading stable. She understood the significance of this moment beyond medicine. A young boy had defied social expectations and transformed the outcome of life itself. It was a quiet, profound triumph, moral and human, that no wealth or title could replicate. Hours passed slowly, but steadily the baby remained stable. Nurses and doctors moved with precision and care, but the energy in the room had shifted. Where panic and tension had dominated, there was now calm focus. Where doubt had once festered, there was cautious optimism. Hale finally turned to Malik again. Your courage, it's something I won't forget. His voice was low, weighted with sincerity. You taught me tonight what bravery really means. Malik glanced down, fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. I just remembered what my grandmother taught me, that's all. Hale smiled faintly, eyes glistening. Sometimes the simplest wisdom is the most powerful. The lead doctor, standing nearby, nodded slowly. This case will change protocols. It will remind every professional that listening, observing, and respecting input from all sources is vital, even from those we least expect. Malik's chest rose and fell, relief mingling with exhaustion. He had done something that night few people ever got the chance to do. He had impacted life itself. And in that realization, he felt a quiet sense of fulfillment that went beyond praise, money, or acknowledgement. Dr. Carter approached Hale, her eyes calm but firm. Your son is stable, she said. He will recover fully, but we must continue monitoring. The rest will follow naturally. Hale exhaled, leaning against the wall, relief and gratitude flooding him. He realized that the measures of life were not in wealth, influence, or control. They were in courage, attention, and the ability to act morally, even under extreme pressure. Malik stood, stretching slightly, feeling the tension release from his shoulders. For the first time in hours, he felt truly light. He had been part of something extraordinary, not for recognition, but because he had acted when it mattered most. The lead doctor finally spoke again. I underestimated the boy, he admitted quietly. And I underestimated Dr. Carter. Tonight, they both reminded us that human judgment, humility, and courage can achieve what training alone cannot. Hale moved closer to Malik. You've given my son a second chance at life, he said softly. and you've given me a lesson I'll never forget." Malik nodded, silent, absorbing the weight of the words. Recognition was new, but it was grounded in truth. It was not flattery or empty praise. It was acknowledgement of the impact he had had, of the courage he had displayed, and of the moral clarity he had acted upon. Dr. Carter finally allowed herself a deep breath. The monitors remained steady. The baby's small movements were smooth, unstrained, and healthy. Every professional in the room felt a quiet transformation, understanding that authority and expertise mattered, but so did attention, courage, and moral action. Hale looked around the room at exhausted but resolute faces. "We survived," he said softly, "and we've all learned something tonight." Malik's lips curved slightly, a small, private acknowledgement of the journey. He had stepped into a world that rarely noticed him, acted when it counted, and emerged with the knowledge that even the smallest voice could matter. The room settled into a quiet rhythm. Nurses checked lines, monitors hummed steadily, and Dr. Carter observed every detail. Life, fragile but resilient, persisted. And in that persistence, every person present felt the depth of what had been achieved. The baby's tiny fingers curled naturally. His eyelids fluttered. Hale's eyes glistened as he whispered once more, "Thank you," not just to Malik, not just to Dr. Carter, but to everyone in the room who had dared to act responsibly, courageously, and morally when the stakes could not have been higher. Outside the ICU, life continued its course. Phones rang. Doctors and staff moved past, unaware of the extraordinary drama that had unfolded. But inside this room, history had been made in the quietest, most profound way. A life saved because attention had been paid, courage had been shown, and the unthinkable had been dared. Malik finally allowed himself to sit back fully, exhausted yet satisfied. He had acted. He had been heard, and the consequences had been real and undeniable. Richard Hale gazed at his son again, his hand resting lightly on the incubator. "I've built companies," he murmured, "but nothing I've ever done compares to tonight." Dr. Carter approached quietly. "The baby will recover fully," she said, "and we've documented everything. Others will learn from this. But the most important thing is that he lived because you all paid attention, acted with courage, and remained morally vigilant." Hale finally nodded, humility settling over him like a weight lifted. For the first time, he understood that wealth and power were secondary. True influence came from listening, from courage, from moral action. Malik's eyes softened as he looked at the baby, then at Hale, then at Dr. Carter. A quiet satisfaction settled in him. He had acted. He had been seen, and he had learned that even the smallest voice could change the trajectory of life. Hours later, when the room quieted completely, Dr. Carter stepped back, surveying the scene. Every person present had been transformed by the night's events. Authority had been questioned. Pride had been humbled. Courage had been validated. And life, small but indomitable, had triumphed. The baby slept peacefully. The monitors remained steady. The hum of machines was now a lullaby, not a warning. And for everyone present, the memory of this night would remain, a testament to the power of observation, the bravery of speaking up, and the moral imperative to act when it matters most. Life often reminds us that courage does not wear a crown and wisdom is not measured by wealth. Tonight, in a quiet hospital room, a small boy's voice rose above the noise of authority and expertise. Malik, overlooked and underestimated, noticed what no one else did. He spoke. He acted. And in doing so, he saved a life. His bravery was quiet, but its impact was monumental. We live in a world that frequently dismisses the marginalized, the unseen, and the underestimated. Yet this story proves that true value does not reside in status, money, or position. It resides in attention, empathy, and moral courage. The boy's simple act of observation forced experts to listen, question, and ultimately act, reminding us that the unthinkable can be achieved when someone dares to notice what others ignore. The billionaire Richard Hale learned a lesson that no fortune could teach. Wealth can open doors, but it cannot replace humility. Authority can command, but it cannot guarantee life. In the end, it was humanity, careful attention, listening, and courage that triumphed. Hale's gratitude, though profound, extended beyond personal relief. It was a recognition that life is sustained not by power alone, but by the willingness to act morally when every outcome hangs in the balance. Dr. Evelyn Carter, who risked defiance and reputation to follow truth over protocol, represents the moral compass of the story. Her guidance reminds us that expertise is only as valuable as the integrity and courage behind it. When combined with Malik's insight, their partnership became unstoppable, a testament to collaboration, respect, and the human instinct to preserve life above ego. This story leaves us with a universal truth: every voice matters. Every observation, no matter how small, can change the course of events. Sometimes the world expects silence from those it underestimates, but when that silence is broken with courage and moral clarity, impossible outcomes become possible. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs a reminder. Bravery does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it simply notices. But when acted upon, even the smallest voice can reshape destinies, heal the overlooked, and bring light where despair once stood. In life, listen, observe, act. The unthinkable is never beyond reach for those willing to see what others miss.